The first thing you forget, after you leave the life, is the silence. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of dread. For months, my nights had been filled with the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the creak of an old house settling, the distant whisper of traffic on the main road. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Tonight, that safety was shattered by a sound I hadn't heard in years, the frantic, desperate pounding on my front door. It was 2 a.m. The rain, a relentless, weeping gray sheet, hadn't stopped for hours, but the sound that followed the banging, a raw, ragged sob that tore through the noise of the storm, cut deeper than any thunder. It was the sound of my daughter. My Emily. I threw the covers off, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. Every step to the door was a prayer and a curse. Please, let it be a fight with a friend. A fender bender. Anything but him. But I knew. A mother always knows. The specific frequency of that particular pain is a signal wired directly into your soul. I flicked on the porch light and pulled the door open. And there she was. My daughter, the bright, laughing girl who had walked down an aisle just 2 years ago, was a drowned ghost on my doorstep. Rain plastered her hair to her skull, her beautiful dress, one I'd bought her for her anniversary, was torn at the shoulder, and a constellation of angry purple was beginning to bloom across her cheekbone. She was trembling, not from the cold, but from the kind of deep, cellular shock that rattles the bones. "Mom," she gasped, her voice a fractured whisper. The word was an anchor she'd thrown across a chasm of pain, hoping I would catch it. He hit me. For her. For a single, silent moment, the world stopped. The rain, the wind, the frantic beat of my own heart, it all went silent. All I could see was the geography of my daughter's pain mapped out on her face. The split lip. The terror in her eyes. For her. 2 words that explained everything and condemned a man to a fate he couldn't yet imagine. My son-in-law, Mark. The charming, successful man who had once stood in this very living room, holding my hand, looking me in the eye, and promising to love and protect my only child. He hadn't just broken a promise. He had declared war. "Get inside," I said, my voice low, dangerously calm. I wrapped her in my arms, pulling her out of the storm and into the warmth of the house. I grabbed the thick wool blanket from the back of the couch and draped it around her shivering shoulders. She collapsed onto the cushions, the sobs she'd been holding back finally breaking free in a gut-wrenching torrent. I knelt in front of her. "You're safe now, sweetheart," I whispered, tucking the blanket around her. "He can't hurt you here. You're safe." She wept into her hands, and I let her. The storm outside had found its way into my house, and it needed to rage until it was spent. But while my hands were gentle, my mind was already somewhere else. It was a cold, quiet, orderly place that I hadn't visited in a long time. Years of discipline, of meticulously connecting dots that others couldn't see, of staring into the abyss of human cruelty until it blinked first, it was all stirring awake. The gears were clicking back into place, oiled by a mother's righteous fury. My gaze drifted across the room, past the family photos on the mantel, Emily as a gap-toothed kid, Emily at graduation, Emily on her wedding day, smiling at the monster, and landed on the closet door. Behind that door, sealed in a garment bag, hung a uniform I hadn't worn in months. Dark navy blue, perfectly pressed, the creases still sharp as a knife's edge. A symbol of a life I'd sworn to leave behind me, a promise I'd made to myself for the sake of a quiet retirement. But some oaths, I was learning, are written in disappearing ink. And some promises are meant to be broken when a greater one is violated. I stood up, my movements deliberate. I walked to the coat rack by the door, where my old work bag hung, untouched for so long it had a fine layer of dust on it. I unzipped the side pocket. My fingers closed around the cold, heavy metal. The badge. I pulled it out, its weight familiar and comforting in my palm. The silver eagle seemed to catch the dim lamplight, its eyes glinting. I clipped it to the breast of my robe. It felt like coming home. Then, I pulled out my phone and made a single call. I didn't need to look up the number. It was seared into my memory. It rang twice. A gruff, sleepy voice answered. Yeah. My voice, when I spoke, was unrecognizable. It was stripped of all warmth, all emotion. It was the voice I used to use in interrogation rooms, the voice that could make a hardened criminal's blood run cold. It's Helen, I said. Activate it. The plan starts now. There was no hesitation on the other end. Just a quiet, understanding, copy that. ETA 10 minutes. The line went dead. That if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, the ice-cold dread of seeing someone you love hurt by a person they trusted, then you know the fire that was just lit inside of me. Stick with me through this story, and if you believe that justice should always find a way, hit that like button and subscribe. You're not going to want to miss a single second of what's coming. Part 1, The Perfect Lie. To understand the depth of Mark's betrayal, you have to understand the perfection of his facade. He didn't just fool my daughter, he fooled everyone. He was a master craftsman of perception, and his masterpiece was his own life. I first met Mark 4 years ago. Emily brought him home for Sunday dinner. He walked in not with a cheap bottle of wine, but with a carefully selected vintage from a small vineyard he knew I'd appreciate, along with a bouquet of stargazer lilies, my late husband's favorite flower, to give me. He'd done his homework. He was tall, impeccably dressed in that effortlessly expensive way, a crisp shirt with no tie, a watch that cost more than my car. But it was his smile that was his true weapon. It was warm, disarming, and seemed to reach all the way to his eyes. Seemed to. Helen, it is an absolute honor to finally meet you, he'd said, his handshake firm, his gaze direct. Emily has told me so much. I feel like I already know you. Over dinner, he was captivating. He spoke of his work in private equity with a self-deprecating humor that masked an obvious, ferocious ambition. He asked about my late husband, Richard, and listened with rapt attention as I spoke, making me feel seen and heard. He talked about his own humble beginnings, painting a classic rags to riches story that made his success feel earned, not entitled. He was, in every conceivable way, the perfect man. My daughter was smitten. Head over heels, blind to the world, floating. I saw how she looked at him, how she hung on his every word. She had always been a smart girl, grounded and intuitive, but Mark's charm was a gravitational force she couldn't escape. And me? I smiled. I laughed at his jokes. I told Emily he was wonderful. But deep in the recesses of my detective's gut, a tiny, silent alarm was ringing. It was nothing I could put my finger on. It was the way his smile never quite faded, even when he was listening to something serious. The way his eyes scanned a room, constantly assessing, calculating. The way he subtly steered every conversation back to a topic that highlighted his own success or generosity. It was 100 tiny, almost imperceptible things that felt rehearsed. Programmed. I saw a predator who had mastered the camouflage of a perfect gentleman. I told myself I was being cynical. A retired cop seeing shadows where there were none. An overprotective mother afraid of losing her daughter. So I buried the feeling. I toasted to their engagement. I helped Emily pick out her wedding dress. I stood in the front pew and watched him slide a ring on her finger, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach even as I smiled for the cameras. For 2 years, the performance continued. Mark was the model's son-in-law. He'd call me just to check in. He'd send extravagant gifts for my birthday. He remembered the anniversary of Richard's passing and would have flowers delivered to the house. He and Emily built a beautiful life in a glass and steel house overlooking the city, a monument to his success. From the outside, it was a fairy tale. But I'd get phone calls from Emily, late at night, when Mark was on one of his frequent business trips. Her voice would be small. She'd talk about how controlling he could be about money, dressing it up as him just being fiscally responsible. She'd mention his temper, little flashes of anger over trivial things, a dinner reservation mix-up, a dry cleaning order being late, and laugh it off as him just being stressed from work. He's under so much pressure, Mom, she'd say, and I could hear the excuse-making in her own voice. He worked so hard for us. Each story was a small, red flag, flapping in a breeze that was slowly growing into a gale. I tried to probe, gently. Is he good to you, honey? Really? Of course, Mom. He's amazing. I'm so lucky. The denial was a wall I couldn't seem to penetrate. She was in too deep. She had invested her entire heart into the idea of this perfect life, and she wasn't ready to admit the foundation was cracked. Now, sitting here on my couch, the truth of those cracks was bleeding all over my living room floor. After her initial storm of tears subsided, Emily spoke, her voice hoarse. She told me about the last few months. How the small flashes of temper had grown into furious, terrifying rants. How the financial control had become a complete lockdown. She had to ask for money just to buy groceries. He belittled her in front of his friends, calling her thoughts and opinions cute but naive. He was systematically dismantling her self-esteem, piece by piece, isolating her in their glass castle. Tonight was his company's annual gala. Emily had been looking forward to it. She'd bought the dress she was now wearing, hoping for a return to the early days, a night of romance. But at the party, he had ignored her. He'd spent the entire night talking to a younger woman from his legal department, a stunning brunette named Clara. He'd laughed with her, touched her arm, whispered in her ear. Emily, my daughter, had been rendered a piece of furniture. When she confronted him in the car on the way home, his rage had been explosive. When they got inside their pristine, minimalist home, the verbal abuse began. He called her pathetic. Jealous. Ungrateful. I give you this incredible life, he had screamed, his face inches from hers. And you have the audacity to question me? To embarrass me? You embarrassed me, Mark. Emily had screamed back, her own fear finally eclipsed by her pain. You humiliated me with that woman all night. And that's when it happened. He told her that Clara was everything she wasn't, smart, ambitious, exciting. He said, maybe I want a partner, not a leech. Emily, emboldened by 2 years of suppressed anger, had slapped him. It was a desperate, foolish act, but the act of a cornered animal. His response was not a slap back. It was a closed fist. He punched her, hard, in the face. She'd stumbled backward, crashing into a glass table, the sound of it shattering echoing the sound of her life breaking apart. He stood over her, his eyes black with a rage she had never seen before. Look what you made me do, he'd hissed. That was the line. The classic, cowardly mantra of the abuser. It was then that she knew. She scrambled up, grabbing her keys and her purse, and ran. She didn't even stop for a coat. She just ran, into the rain, to the only safe harbor she had ever known. My house. As she finished her story, her voice trailing off into a defeated whisper, I felt the last vestiges of Helen, the retired grandmother, burn away. In my mind, the crime scene was taking shape. I saw the shattered glass table. I saw the torn dress. I saw the bruise on my daughter's face as Exhibit A. And I saw Mark, not as a son-in-law, but as a perpetrator. The suspect. The professional part of my brain was already cataloging evidence, planning the sequence of events. First, a hospital visit to get her injuries officially documented by a neutral third party. Then, a formal statement. Photographs. A restraining order. The standard procedure. But beneath the cold, logical process, a magma of pure, undiluted fury was boiling. The standard procedure was for strangers. 4 cases. This was not a case. This was my blood. The system is slow. It's methodical. It has loopholes a man with Mark's money and connections could sail a yacht through. He would hire the best lawyers. He would paint Emily as unstable. He would walk away clean, leaving my daughter broken in his wake. No. Not this time, the standard procedure would be Plan A. But I had always been a firm believer in contingencies. Over the last 2 years, as my unease about Mark grew, a seed of a thought had been planted in the back of my mind. A dark, what-if scenario. What if my gut was right? What if he wasn't just arrogant, but dangerous? I had, quietly, without telling a soul, begun to put the pieces in place for a response. A protocol. A scorched earth insurance policy I prayed I would never have to cash in. It wasn't just a phone number. It was a network. A small, tight-knit group of people I'd worked with over a 30-year career. People who operated in the gray areas. A forensic accountant who owed me his career. A surveillance expert who could find a ghost in a snowstorm. A former prosecutor who was now a high-powered private investigator with a very particular set of skills. We all trusted each other implicitly, bound by the things we had done and seen. We called it the Janus Protocol. One face for the public system of justice, and another, for when that system failed. I looked at my daughter, her face pale in the lamplight, and the decision was made. Mark wasn't just going to be arrested. He was going to be dismantled. Erased. His perfect, curated life was about to be put through a shredder. In the distance, through the drumming of the rain, I heard it. The low, distinct rumble of V8 engines. Not police sirens. Something heavier. More serious. Headlights sliced through the storm, sweeping across my living room window. They were here. My team. Emily looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. Mom, what is that? Who's here? I stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the two black SUVs parked at the curb, their engines idling like sleeping beasts. Men and women in dark, functional rain gear were already moving with quiet, disciplined purpose. I let the curtain fall back into place and turned to my daughter. My voice was steady, a promise forged in steel. That, sweetheart, I said, a faint, cold smile touching my lips, is justice. Part 2, The Unbreachable Wall. Before you bring down the thunder, you have to try to ring the doorbell. Before you unleash a hurricane, you have to see if a polite knock will suffice. It's about procedure. It's about due process. But more than that, it's about being able to look yourself in the mirror afterward and know, with absolute certainty, that you gave the system every possible chance to work before you took matters into your own hands. The men and women from the SUVs weren't a goon squad. They were my people, my real-world assets for the Janus Protocol, but their first role was support. The man who had answered my call, David, came to the door. He was a mountain of a man, a former Marine Force recon soldier who now ran a high-end security firm. He had a face like a granite cliff, but his eyes, when he looked at Emily huddled on the couch, were gentle. Helen, he said, his voice a low rumble. Talk to me. David, I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Domestic assault. Suspect is Mark Thorne. My son-in-law. His eyes hardened, but his expression didn't change. With him were two others, a woman named Anya, a former paramedic with a specialization in forensic evidence collection, and a young man named Leo, a tech wizard who looked like he should be at a gaming convention, not a pre-dawn tactical operation. Anya, see to Emily, I commanded. Document everything. Every bruise, every scratch. High-resolution photos. Leo, stay in the car for now. I want you to start a deep data sweep. Financials, communications, everything you can get on Mark Thorne and a woman named Clara Jensen from his legal department. David, you're with me. We're going to do this by the book. For now. Anya approached Emily with the calm, soothing demeanor of a seasoned professional. Hi Emily, she said softly. My name is Anya. I'm here to help. Can I take a look at your face? We just need to make sure we have a record of everything. Emily, dazed, just nodded. As Anya worked, David and I stood in the kitchen. By the book, he questioned, raising a skeptical eyebrow. Helen, you know what a guy like this can do. He'll lawyer up so fast your head will spin. I know, I said, pouring 2 cups of coffee, my hands perfectly steady. But the evidence we gather now will be for the official report. We need a paper trail. We need to show we tried the front door before we decided to blow the house down. Take me to the hospital. A police report needs to be filed from a neutral location. The next few hours were a masterclass in the soul-crushing bureaucracy I thought I'd escaped. At the hospital, the emergency room was a cacophony of beeping machines and weary voices. We waited for 45 minutes before a doctor saw Emily. He was young, overworked, and his sympathy felt like a practiced script. He documented her injuries: a fractured zygomatic bone, contusions, a sprained wrist from her fall, his pen scratching on a form that would become just one more piece of paper in a mountain of human misery. From there, we went to the 24-hour precinct downtown. Not my old precinct, a deliberate choice. I didn't want to call in any favors yet. I wanted to see the system as a civilian would. It was worse than I remembered. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, disinfectant, and despair. The desk sergeant looked at us with tired, uninterested eyes. We sat on a hard plastic bench for what felt like an eternity. Finally, a detective, a young guy named Miller who looked like he'd been on the job for about 15 minutes, called us into a small, sterile interview room. I let Emily do the talking. I watched Detective Miller as she recounted the story, her voice trembling. He took notes, but I could see it in his body language. The slight lean back in his chair. The way his eyes kept flicking to the clock on the wall. This was just another, she said, domestic dispute to him. Another messy divorce in the making. And you say you slapped him first? Miller asked, his tone flat. Yes, but he was screaming at me, he just admitted to. Emily's voice trailed off, the injustice of the question stealing her breath. Okay. We'll send a car by his residence to get his statement, Miller said, closing his notepad with an air of finality. In the meantime, you should probably find somewhere else to stay. Rage, cold and pure, washed over me. That's it, detective? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You're going to go ask the man who did this for his side of the story? You have a victim with a broken cheekbone and photographic evidence of her injuries. Miller's eyes finally focused on me, a flicker of annoyance in them. Ma'am, with all due respect, I have to follow procedure. I don't have a warrant. I need his statement. If their stories conflict, we'll investigate further. That's how it works. I know how it works, detective, I said, the words tasting like acid. I also know that by the time you investigate further, he'll have a high-priced lawyer who will claim she attacked him and he was defending himself. You just gave him all the time he needs to build his defense. Miller stood up. Look, I'll file the report. A prosecutor will look at it. If they think there's a case, we'll move forward. It's out of my hands now. Walking out of that precinct and into the gray, pre-dawn light was one of the most demoralizing moments of my life. I had spent 30 years inside that system, believing in it, upholding it. Now, on the outside, I could see it for what it was, a lumbering, indifferent machine, utterly incapable of protecting my daughter from a man like Mark. We got back to my house just as the sun was beginning to rise. Emily, exhausted and emotionally drained, went straight to her old bedroom and fell into a deep, troubled sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with David. The coffee was cold. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world washed out and gray. Leo's been busy, David said, pushing his phone across the table to me. Leo's initial sweep was already bearing fruit. Mark wasn't just cheating on my daughter, he was living a completely separate life. There were credit card statements showing lavish gifts for Clara Jensen, jewelry, weekend trips to Napa, dinners at restaurants Emily had only dreamed of going to. There were reservations for a hotel in the city for that very night. He had never intended to go home with his wife. The gala was just a public stage for their affair. And then there was the financial data. Leo had found encrypted folders on Mark's cloud server. He hadn't broken into them yet, but the file names were suggestive: offshore portfolios, client discretionary accounts, Nassau transfers. He's hiding money, I murmured, scrolling through the data. A lot of it. Looks like it, David said. Leo thinks it's more than just tax evasion. The way it's structured, it looks like he's skimming from his client's investment funds. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered, putting it on speaker. Is this Helen Croft? The voice was smooth, confident, and dripping with condescension. The kind of voice that bills at $1,000 an hour. Who is this? I asked. My name is Julian Vance. I represent Mark Thorne. I understand there was an unfortunate incident last night. Mark is deeply concerned about his wife's emotional state. He tells me she has had episodes of instability in the past. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was happening. Exactly as I predicted. He also tells me, the lawyer continued, his voice like silk-wrapped poison, that she assaulted him in their home, and he was forced to restrain her, during which she fell. He has a cut on his lip from her ring to corroborate this. He was gracious enough not to press charges, hoping this matter could be resolved amicably. The audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't just denying it, he was flipping the entire narrative, painting Emily as the aggressor, the unstable one. He was using her pain against her. Is there a point to this call, Mr. Vance? I said, my voice tight. Yes. Mark is willing to be generous. He'll agree to an uncontested divorce. He'll even provide a small settlement, on the condition that Emily signs a non-disclosure agreement and agrees to seek psychological counseling. If she refuses, or if these slanderous accusations of abuse continue, we will be forced to countersue for defamation and file a restraining order against her. Given her condition, I'm confident we would get it. Do we have an understanding? I disconnected the call without another word. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, suffocating. The system hadn't just failed. It had been hijacked and turned into a weapon against us. The front door was locked, bolted, and barricaded. There would be no justice from Detective Miller or the DA's office. Mark and his lawyer had built an unbreachable wall around themselves. David looked at me, his expression grim. So much for doing it by the book. I stared out the window at the bleak morning light. A cold, hard certainty settled in my bones. I had given the world of rules and procedures its chance. It had spit in my face. Now, we would operate in a different world. A world without rules. My world. I picked up my phone and dialed Leo. Leo, I said. Forget the sweep. I want you to crack those encrypted files. I don't care what it takes. I want every dirty secret, every illegal transaction. I want the key to his kingdom. Then I called Anya. How is she? Sleeping, Anya replied. The documentation is complete. The photos they're damning, Helen. Good, I said. Now I have a different job for you. The mistress, Clara Jensen. I want to know everything about her. Her friends, her habits, her ambitions, her weaknesses. I want you to get close to her. Become her best friend. A long pause. That's deep cover, Helen. It's risky. This is a risky situation, Anya. Mark thinks he's untouchable. We're going to prove him wrong. We're not going to knock on his wall anymore. We're going to find the rot in his foundation and bring the whole thing down on his head. I hung up and looked at David. The weariness and despair I'd felt leaving the precinct were gone, replaced by a clarity of purpose that felt like putting on a familiar coat. The path forward was no longer shrouded in fog. It was a straight, dark line. He wants to play dirty, I said, my voice a low growl. He has no idea what dirty is. Part 3, Sharpening the Spears. The days that followed were a quiet, simmering hell. On the surface, my house returned to a semblance of normalcy. I made Emily tea. We watched old movies. We talked about anything and everything except what was happening. I needed to create a bubble of peace for her, a sanctuary where she could begin to piece her shattered confidence back together. But beneath the surface of domestic calm, the gears of the Janus protocol were grinding with terrifying efficiency. My living room became a war room. My quiet retirement became the headquarters of a covert operation. My team worked in the shadows. We communicated through encrypted channels, never speaking of the plan on open lines. While Emily slept, David, Leo, and I would huddle around my kitchen table, the glow of a laptop screen illuminating our faces as we pieced together the blueprint of Mark's destruction. Leo was the first to strike gold. After 48 straight hours fueled by energy drinks and a burning sense of injustice, he broke the encryption on Mark's offshore files. It was worse than we could have imagined. Mark wasn't just skimming. He was running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He was taking in massive investments from wealthy, powerful clients, captains of industry, old money families, even a few notoriously unsavory international businessmen, and instead of investing their money, he was using new client funds to pay phony returns to the old ones, all while siphoning off millions for himself into untraceable accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. He's a ghost, Leo explained, pointing at a complex flowchart on his screen. The money moves through a dozen shell corporations before it lands. It's a masterpiece of fraud. The FBI or the SEC could spend years trying to unravel this and still come up with nothing. But we don't need to unravel it all, do we? I asked, my eyes fixed on one particular name on the client list. A name I recognized. A notoriously litigious, borderline sociopathic real estate tycoon named Alastair Finch. A man known for destroying his enemies in court and in the press. No, Leo said, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. We just need to show one wolf that the shepherd has been stealing his sheep. The rest of the pack will do the work for us. Our strategy began to crystallize. This wouldn't be a frontal assault. It would be death by 1,000 cuts, executed with surgical precision. The plan had 3 prongs: financial ruin, professional disgrace, and personal annihilation. While Leo mapped out Mark's financial crimes, Anya began her infiltration. Clara Jensen, the mistress, was ambitious and vain. She frequented high-end yoga studios and exclusive cocktail bars. Anya, a chameleon who could slip into any social circle, created a new identity for herself, a freelance art consultant with a trust fund and a recent, messy breakup. Over the course of a week, Anya engineered a series of chance encounters. She was on the yoga mat next to Clara. She was at the bar, ordering the same obscure cocktail. She was, coincidentally, at the same gallery opening. Anya was a master of feigned vulnerability. She shared stories of her fictional cheating ex-boyfriend, creating an instant bond of solidarity. Soon, she and Clara were having brunch. Then dinner. Then late-night phone calls. Anya relayed her conversations to me every night. Clara was infatuated with Mark, but she was also deeply insecure. Mark had promised her the world, told her he was going to leave his unstable, boring wife for her. He'd spun her a fantasy, and she'd bought every word. She's not a villain in this, not really, Anya told me one night over our secure line. She's another one of his victims. He's using her ambition, her desire for a certain lifestyle, against her. But she's also our key. He's arrogant around her. He boasts. Then let him boast, I said. I need you to get him on tape, Anya. I need his voice, admitting what he is. Anya acquired a state-of-the-art recording device, disguised as a luxury fountain pen, a gift for Clara to give to Mark. It was a gamble, but a calculated one. Meanwhile, David focused on the physical world. He had a 2-man surveillance team on Mark around the clock. They tracked his movements, his meetings, his habits. We learned he had a weekly poker game with several of his company's board members. We learned he was paying cash for a private storage unit across town. We learned he had a standing appointment every Thursday afternoon that wasn't in his official calendar. The storage unit was a tantalizing mystery. What would a man with a glass house in the sky need with a 10-by-10 concrete box? Under a court order, getting a warrant would be impossible. But David didn't operate under court orders. One night, his team bypassed the facility's low-tech security system with ease. Inside, they found what we were looking for. Not cash or gold, but paper. Boxes and boxes of it, The original, hard copy documents for all of his fraudulent shell corporations and offshore accounts. The one thing he couldn't trust to the cloud. It was the Rosetta Stone of his entire criminal enterprise. They photographed every single document and were gone without a trace. My role in all of this was the strategist. The queen on the chessboard. I took the intelligence from Leo, Anya, and David and wove it into a web. The tension in the house was unbearable. I was living a double life. In the daylight, I was a caring mother, nursing my daughter back to health. Emily was getting stronger. The bruises on her face faded, but the ones on her soul were deeper. She'd started therapy, but she was still terrified, checking the locks on the doors, jumping at every unfamiliar sound. She knew I was angry, but she had no idea about the storm I was gathering. She thought we were still waiting on Detective Miller to call us back. The silence from the police was all the confirmation she needed that Mark was going to get away with it. "He's going to win, isn't he, Mom?" she asked me one evening, her voice small and broken. "A man like him, they always win." I took her hand. "No, sweetheart," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "Not this time. I promise you. He is not going to win." It was the truest thing I had ever said. The final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Anya, during a tearful brunch with Clara, managed to get her to plant the pen recorder in Mark's briefcase. "He'll think it's a sign that you see him as a serious, powerful man," Anya had suggested. Clara, eager to please, had done it without a second thought. 2 days later, we had what we needed. Mark, feeling untouchable, had been talking to one of his shadier offshore bankers on a call from his car. And on the recording, clear as day, was his voice, laughing about how he was playing the market like a fiddle, and how his clients were rich, dumb sheep waiting to be sheared. He even made a cruel joke about Emily, calling her his broken little songbird. Listening to it, I felt no emotion. Just a cold, final confirmation. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable. That night, we assembled the packages. For Alastair Finch, the ruthless tycoon, Leo compiled a digital dossier accessible by a single, secure link. It contained an easy-to-follow summary of how Mark had funneled away nearly $20 million of Finch's money, complete with copies of the documents from the storage unit and a snippet of the audio where Mark referred to his clients as sheep. For the board of directors at Mark's firm, a similar package, this one detailing the massive liability he had exposed the company to, along with evidence of his affair with a junior employee, a clear violation of their corporate code of conduct. For the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the SEC, we created anonymous whistleblower files, containing the full, unredacted evidence of the Ponzi scheme. We would send them from a public library computer, routing the signal through a dozen countries. They would never be traced back to us. And finally, for Clara. Anya would handle that herself. She would sit down with her, as a friend, and play her the full, unedited recording of Mark, not just the financial talk, but the cruel, dismissive way he spoke about Emily, and the way he spoke about Clara herself to his friends, as a fun diversion. She would be given the chance to walk away before the entire world came crashing down. It was the only mercy we would grant in this entire operation. With the packages prepared and ready for deployment, I stood in my darkened living room, looking out at the city lights. Dawn was a few hours away. It was time. I sent a single text message to David, Leo, and Anya. 3 words. Make it rain. David's team was already in position outside Mark's house. Not to go in, but to watch. To be my eyes. To give me a front row seat for the moment his perfect world began to burn. I walked into Emily's room. She was asleep, her face finally peaceful for the first time in weeks. I gently brushed the hair from her forehead. The last visible trace of the bruise was a faint yellow shadow on her cheekbone, a ghost of his crime. By the time the sun rose, I vowed, a new day would be dawning for her, and an endless night would be falling for him. This wasn't just revenge. It was a rebalancing of the scales. A correction. The kind of justice you can't get from a courtroom. Part 4, The Harvest. Dawn broke cold and clear. There was no storm, no rain, just a pale, unforgiving light that crept over the city, promising to expose every secret. I sat at my kitchen table, a fresh cup of coffee in my hand, my phone on the table in front of me. It was the only weapon I needed now. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house. It was the calm before the symphony of destruction I had composed. At 6 a.m. sharp, the first note played. Leo, from an anonymous laptop in a 24-hour cafe, pressed send. A single, encrypted email containing the link to the Alastair Finch dossier was delivered to Finch's personal email account, an address that was notoriously difficult to obtain. But Leo, my ghost in the machine, had found it. At 6:05 a.m., a second wave of emails, containing the board of directors package, was sent to the personal inboxes of all 7 members of Mark's company's board. At 6:10 a.m., the anonymous whistleblower tips were uploaded to the public portals of the IRS and the SEC. The seeds were planted. Now, we just had to wait for them to sprout. It didn't take long. At 6:47 a.m., David's voice crackled in my ear through a secure earpiece. We have movement. Subject is leaving the residence. He's in his running gear. Looks like his usual morning jog. Mark, blissfully unaware, was starting his day like any other. A picture of health and discipline. I imagined him running along the waterfront, his mind on interest rates and profit margins, believing himself to be the king of his universe. While he was gone, Anya made her move. She had arranged to meet Clara for coffee near her apartment. She sat across from the young woman, her expression somber, and played the recording. I wasn't there, but Anya described it to me later. The initial confusion on Clara's face, turning to dawning horror, then to heartbreak, and finally, to a quiet, cold fury. She saw him for what he was. She saw herself as a pawn. By the time Anya left, Clara was packing her bags, not just to leave Mark, but to cooperate with any investigation that came her way. She was saving herself. The real fireworks began at 7:52 a.m. Helen, you're not going to believe this, David said, a note of awe in his voice. Alastair Finch is here. In person. He just pulled up in a black Maybach with 2 guys who look like they eat bricks for breakfast. They're walking up to Mark's front door. My heart hammered in my chest. This was faster, more beautifully direct than I could have hoped for. Mark returned from his run just as Finch was ringing his doorbell. David's team had a camera with a long-range lens, feeding the video directly to my phone. I watched as Mark, sweaty and smiling, opened the door. His smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure shock. Finch, a man who radiated menace like a furnace radiates heat, said something I couldn't hear. Mark's face went pale. He gestured for them to come inside. The door closed. They've been in there for 20 minutes, David reported. No shouting. Just silence. Silence was worse. Silence was terrifying. At 8:15 a.m., the door opened again. Finch walked out, looking impassive. His 2 bodyguards followed, and between them was Mark. He was no longer the master of the universe. His face was ashen, his running clothes were disheveled. He looked broken. They put him in the back of the Maybach and drove away. Where are they taking him? I breathed. My guess? To his lawyer's office. Or maybe just to a very unpleasant meeting, David said. Finch isn't a man who calls the police. He handles things himself first. But the police were coming anyway. At 9:30 a.m., the SEC and IRS, acting with unprecedented speed, likely spurred on by a separate, furious phone call from Alastair Finch's legal team, executed a joint raid. I watched on my phone as unmarked cars swarmed Mark Street. Federal agents in windbreakers, carrying battering rams and evidence boxes, stormed his beautiful glass house. It was a full-scale, undeniable, public spectacle. Neighbors came out of their homes, staring in disbelief as the man they knew as a pillar of the community had his life dismantled piece by piece. Simultaneously, another team was raiding his downtown office, shutting the entire floor down, sending his employees home in a state of shock. The news broke just before noon. The story was everywhere. Prominent financier Mark Thorne detained in massive fraud investigation. His impeccably curated image was shattered in an instant, replaced by a mugshot-style photo of him being led from his lawyer's office in handcuffs by federal agents. Alastair Finch had apparently dropped him off just in time for the official arrest. Emily woke up around then. She came into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She saw the news channel on the small TV I had on the counter. She saw Mark's face. She saw the headline. She just stood there, her hand covering her mouth, silent tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of shock, of release. The monster who had haunted her dreams was suddenly small, pathetic, a common criminal on a television screen. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a question she couldn't articulate. "Mom, how?" I just wrapped my arms around her and held her tight. "I told you he wouldn't win," I whispered into her hair. "I promised." The fallout was biblical. Mark's firm collapsed within a week. The board members, facing their own legal troubles for lack of oversight, turned on him completely. His powerful clients, led by Finch, filed a civil suit that would strip him of every last stolen penny. He was denied bail, deemed a flight risk due to his offshore accounts. His life as he knew it was over. He would spend decades in a federal prison. His name would become a cautionary tale, a synonym for greed and disgrace. A few weeks later, life had begun to find its new normal. Emily was smiling again, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She was talking about going back to school, finishing the art history degree she'd abandoned for Mark. She was reclaiming her life, her future. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't seen in her in years. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window, the same table that had served as my war room. It was peaceful now. She looked at me over the rim of her teacup, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mom," she began, her voice soft. "Detective Miller never called back, did he?" I took a slow sip of my own tea. "No, honey. He never did." "So how?" She trailed off, still trying to connect the dots between her tearful arrival on my doorstep and the complete, systematic annihilation of the man who had hurt her. The FBI, the SEC. Alastair Finch showing up at the house. It all happened so fast. It was so precise. "How did you do it?" I set my cup down and gave her a faint, tired smile. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of quiet satisfaction. The smile of a job well done. I thought about the lies, the risks, the dark paths I had walked down in the preceding weeks. I thought about the oath I had taken to uphold the law, and the greater oath I had sworn as a mother. "Let's just say," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper, "I never stopped being a detective." She held my gaze for a long moment, and in her eyes, I saw understanding dawn. She didn't need to know the details. She didn't need to know about Janice, or David, or Leo, or Anya. She just needed to know that she was safe. That she was protected. That for every monster in the world, there is someone willing to stand in the darkness to fight them. Justice isn't always about what happens in a courtroom. Sometimes, it's about the promises we keep to the people we love. It's about ensuring that those who believe they are above the consequences are reminded, in the most permanent way possible, that they are not. The system has its place, but when it fails, a mother's love, armed with a lifetime of experience, is the most powerful force on earth. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the kind of justice that doesn't back down, please consider leaving a comment below. What does the word justice mean to you? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of wrongs being made right. Until next time, stay safe, and look out for one another.